The sound of Dunkirk was not the artillery. It was the wood. It was the terrifying rhythmic creak of the East Mola Narrow. Rickety breakwater of whitewashed timber stretching nearly a mile into the gray, heaving throat of the English Channel. It was a sound that lived in the stomach of Lieutenant Commander Arthur Art Halloway, a vibration that felt like a bridge holding its breath before. Snapping it was May 29, 1940. The time was 2 o'clock. The air was a suffocating soup of oil smoke. Low tide, and the sickly sweet stench of unburied dead drifting off the beaches of Maloza Bains. Art stood at the far end of the mole, his greatcoat heavy with sea spray and sweat, gripping a megaphone that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. His normal was a kaleidoscope of misery. For 3 days, he had been the pier master, the man who played God with a queue of 400,000 souls. His world was reduced to the width of 3 wooden planks. To his left, the black, oily water waiting to swallow the clumsy. To his right, the same. In front of him, a column of exhausted, shivering men stretching back into the burning ruins of the town, their faces blending into a singular mask of gray fatigue. Keep the line tight. Shoulders touching. Art croaked, his voice a ruin of its former self. No smoking. 1 spark and the oil goes up. The men obeyed with the sluggish, dreamlike compliance of the walking dead. They were the British Expeditionary Force, the finest professional army in the world, reduced to a huddled mass waiting for a bus that might never come. They didn't speak. They just shuffled. The only sounds were the slap of the waves, the distant crump of the German perimeter closing in, and the occasional, terrifying whistle of a Stuka dive bomber hunting in the dark. Art rubbed his eyes, smearing soot across his forehead. He hadn't slept in 72 hours. He was running on tea, Benzedrine, and terror. His job was simple: pack them onto the destroyers until the gunnels were awash, then wave them off and pray they made it past the U-boats and the mines. A destroyer. The HMS Grenade had just pulled away, her decks a sea of khaki. The mole was empty for a moment, save for the next regiment shuffling forward, the Grenadier Guards, standing tall despite the filth. Their discipline a terrifying anchor in the chaos. Then came the disturbance. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a scream. It was a signal lamp. From the darkness of the sea, a signal light began to blink rapidly. Art squinted against the gloom. His signalman, a young rating named Chalky White, raised his own lamp to acknowledge. "What is it, Chalky?" Art asked, leaning against a bollard to take the weight off his trembling legs. Chalky deciphered the flashes, his lips moving silently. "Sir, it's the HMS Wakeful. She's signaling. Inbound. Capacity 600. Prepare to load immediately." Following astern, HMS Grafton and HMS Comfort. Convoy capacity total 2,000. Art felt a surge of adrenaline that was almost painful. 2,000 men. That was a massive lift that could clear the entire mole queue. It was the miracle they needed. The tide was turning, the fog was rolling in to cover them, and 3 ships were steaming in to save the day. Right Art stood up straight, ignoring the pain in his back. "You heard him. Sergeant Major, get the men ready. Double time. We have a heavy lift coming in." The word spread down the line like an electric shock. Heads lifted. Spines straightened. The shuffling stopped, replaced by a tense, eager energy. The promise of the Wakeful and her sisters was a lifeline. Art watched the darkness. He checked his watch. 2:15. They should be visible. The destroyers moved fast. 2:20. The darkness remained. Absolute. 2:30. Nothing. Art frowned. "Chalky, signal them again. Ask for a position update. They should be alongside." Chalky clattered the shutters of his lamp. Click, clack, click. He waited. No answer. The sea was a black void. "Maybe they're running silent, sir," Chalky suggested, though his voice wavered. "Maybe they spotted a U-boat." "Maybe," Art said. But the unease began to coil in his gut. Then, a runner arrived from the shore end of the mole. He was a Royal Engineer, breathless, his face pale. He carried a handwritten note from the senior naval officer SNO ashore. "Sir, message from Captain Tennant. Priority." Art snatched the paper. He read it under the hood of his flashlight. "2. Pier Master East Mole. From Snow Dunkirk time. 2:15 intelligence report. E-boat activity sector 4. HMS Wakeful torpedoed and sunk. 1:45 HMS Grafton stopped to pick up. Survivors HMS Comfort struck by. Collision, convoy dispersed. Nitrogen monoxide ships inbound your sector. For minimum 4 hours." Art stared at the paper. Then he looked at the black water where he had seen the signal lamp just 20 minutes ago. HMS Wakeful sank at 1:45. He had received the signal from her at 2 o'clock. The realization hit him like a physical blow, colder than the Channel wind. The signal hadn't come from the Wakeful. It had come from the E-boat that sank her. The Germans were out there. They were sitting in the dark, watching the mole. They had sunk the rescue ships, salvaged the signal codes, or simply used the captured lamp, and flashed a phantom convoy message to the pier. Why? To keep the men bunched up, to keep the mole packed tight, to stop them from dispersing back to the beaches or the dunes. They were lining them up for something. Art looked up at the sky. The fog, which had been their friend, was thinning. The stars were coming out. Clear the mole. Art screamed, his voice cracking. "Get them back. Move, move." The sergeant major looked at him, confused. "Sir, the ships. They're coming. The men are ready. There are no ships." Art roared, grabbing the sergeant by the webbing. It was a trap. Get them off the wood. Now. But the order was rescinded too late. The machinery of hope was harder to stop than the machinery of war. The men, desperate to believe in the rescue, hesitated. They looked at the empty sea, unwilling to give up their spot in the queue for a ship that didn't exist. And then they heard it, the sound that every man in Dunkirk dreaded more than death itself. The high-pitched, screaming wail of a Jericho trumpet siren. Stuks. They weren't coming from the land. They were dropping out of the clouds directly above the mole, diving on the perfect, dense line of men that the phantom signal had created. Down, get down. The world disintegrated. The first bomb hit the water 50 yards off the mole, sending a tsunami of black water crashing over the wood, washing a dozen men into the sea. The second bomb hit the mole itself, 50 yards down the line. The sound was not an explosion. It was the screaming of timber. The massive wooden piles shattered. Splinters the size of spears flew through the air. Men were thrown like rag dolls. The structure bucked under Art's feet, throwing him hard against a stanchion. He scrambled up, his ears ringing, his vision blurred. The mole was severed. A 30-foot gap had been blown in the walkway. Men were clinging to the broken edges, screaming in the dark. But the Stukas weren't done. They were strafing now, their machine guns chewing up the planking. Hunting the men trapped on the islanded section of the pier, Art crawled toward the edge. He saw Chalky, the signalman. He was gone. His lamp lay smashed on the deck, into the water. Art yelled to the men around him. Jump, swim for the beach. It was chaos. The fragile order of the Cutha British, discipline fractured. Men dove into the oil-slicked water. Those who couldn't swim clung to the pylons. Art stayed on the mole. He found a Bren gun abandoned by a dead soldier. He propped it on the railing. He didn't know what he was shooting at, the shadows in the sky, the E-boats in the dark, but he squeezed the trigger until the magazine clicked dry. The attack lasted 10 minutes. Then silence returned. A heavy, weeping silence. Art slumped against the railing. He looked out at the sea. It was empty. The ghost convoy of the wakeful was never coming. The signal had been a lie, a cruel joke played by a predator in the dark. He looked back toward the town. The oil tanks at the harbor entrance had been hit. A massive column of fire was rising into the sky. Black smoke billowing up to choke the stars. The fire reflected off the water, turning the entire channel into a sheet of liquid copper. He watched the horizon burning red and thought it was dawn until he realized the sun was still hours away. The red glow illuminated the faces of the men in the water, the shattered wood of the mole, and the empty, mocking horizon. The miracle of Dunkirk wasn't a story of ships arriving on time. It was a story of standing on a broken piece of wood, waiting for a lie, and refusing to let go of the railing when the truth finally fell from the sky. Art reloaded the Bren gun. He checked his watch. 3 o'clock, Sergeant Major, he called out into the dark. Still here, sir? A voice croaked from the shadows, wet and shaking. Form them up. The tide is coming in. If the Navy won't come to us, we'll wait for the little ships. But we hold the line. Yes, sir, we hold the line. Art stared at the red horizon. The sun was hours away. But he wasn't waiting for the sun anymore. He was waiting for the next signal, and this time he wouldn't believe it until he could touch the steel of the hull. He wouldn't believe it until he could touch the steel of the hull.